It's a chilly little corner. You know.
It's September 12th, 1998. We're here in Houston, Texas, in the San Jacinto, Sheridan Hotel, with Mr. Grossman from the Headquarters Battalion.
No, it isn't a battalion.
Sorry.
Headquarters and Headquarters Company, Combat Command B. It's a control group, not a battalion. Battalion is your, makes up the Combat Command, perhaps, plus service companies.
And if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about where you came from and before the war.
Before the war, and even now, is Omaha, Nebraska. What type of information do you want? Perhaps we can start off in that fashion.
Well, tell us a little bit about your family and your high school and like kind of where you came from.
Well, family actually, I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and my family, my father was born there as well. Mother was born in St. Joe, Missouri. They grew up in the normal fashion without any problems that I know of. And then we went to Creighton University. I took a Bachelor of Science in Commerce course. While I was there, the war started, World War II. And I continued, I was in school, I belonged to what they called the ERC, which was the Enlisted Reserve Corps at that time. I had taken some ROTC. But based on that, supposedly they expected the war to last, either be over quick or last for some time, so they made that agreement with the college students. As it was in 1943, roughly March, the ERC was called up, and being when I was also called up. I believe we went to Fort Des Moines, if I'm not mistaken, and at that time there was a hay fever season right in the middle of it. They took one look at me sneezing and they said, out. Therefore, at that point, I got a discharge. Honorable, of course. Then, a year later, March 13th or 14th, I was sent my little draft card. So at that point, I went out to Fort Crook, which is now Offutt Field. And I presume they were starting to get ready for D-Day or whatever else they were after. And regardless of whether you were discharged, not discharged, you were acceptable, I presume, if you could walk. At that point, I was drafted. I was sent down to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I was put into the Army. At least that group was Army. I think they were also drafting some into the other branches. The first assignment I believe I had was staff artist of the newspaper at Fort Leavenworth. So there for a short period of time they said, well, we're starting to get orders to move people out, and I ended up in the Army Air Force. That was at Wichita Falls, Shepherd Field. I was there for a short time, and I believe they were starting to look for ground forces. But somehow or other, I was supposed to be transferred to Chanute Field to undergo cryptograph training, I believe. Something happened. I ended up in the hospital, and I don't remember what it was, for a short period of time, but it was just long enough that everybody that could do anything that they felt was important or interesting to them went into the ground forces. So instead of ending up at Chanute Field, I ended up at Camp Barkley, outside, of course, of Abilene, which I'm sure the town you know most about. And at that point, they lined us up at night when we landed there, and it was, you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here. At that point, whether they knew anything of our background or not is completely unknown to me even to this time. And I ended up in Combat Command B headquarters and headquarters company. Mainly, of course, at that point to the company. As the war progressed, I did a number of various jobs, positions, if you want to call it that. As, of course, as enlisted, I was just drafted at that point, not too far ahead of that time. And I did a lot of message center things, mainly. And various things as a tank driver, tank gunner, message center. I don't know, I think we were all a bunch of loose pegs they brought in, and they tried to figure out what to do with us, and we got all sorts of assignments. However, this went on, and as I said, mostly it was message center. Radio system under Captain Sabrowski, who I have met since the war. He's a member of the 12th Armored Association. And under Colonel Bromley. Apparently, we were under General Brewer at Camp Barkley. Some reason he was relieved of his command. And when we got overseas, it was Colonel Bromley, a very fine gentleman. And he was our Combat Command B commanding officer. So the war progressed. I don't know what you want to know about the war or what I can tell you. Maybe you could ask questions. Maybe I can give you some answers.
Well, when you got to, if I can backtrack a second, when you got to Barkley, what did you think of the camp?
If I remember, and I can't remember whether it was Shepherd Field or Camp Barkley, both part of the state of Texas, it was very dusty. Am I correct or incorrect? And I remember distinctly, probably an interesting sideline, the dust was all over everything in the barracks. So somebody got a brilliant idea. We're going to lay tar all over the field. They did. We not only had dust in our barracks, we had tar over the entire barracks, which was a cute side glance, so you might say. But I think Abilene itself was a very small town at that point. I don't remember too much about it, to be very honest with you. Of course, Shepherd Field was right out of Wichita Falls, which is apparently at that time was a much bigger city, and I presume more modern. I don't know how you would describe it. If that answers the question, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Do you remember anything about your experiences on your way up to Shanks and before you guys went over?
No, well, the only thing is when we hit Camp Barkley, they were already starting to put the tanks in the whatever they were going to take with them in Cosmoline, ready for shipping out. Because we were brought in to actually to supplement or the entire unit. So what they did was they grabbed everything that was moving in any direction, and you went into the ground forces, and luckily or unluckily, depending upon how you view it, I presume luckily at this point, I ended up at 12th Armored. But everybody had various assignments. The group that I came in with were from all over, not only Shepherd Field. And I have I believe at least that somewhere we had records that went with us, but we never saw them. They were sent into some headquarters. Because at a somewhat later time, they thought I had completed cryptograph training. And at that point, I told them, I'm sorry, I was on my way to school to be instructed in cryptograph training. So they put some type of, I suppose that was one reason I got into the Combat Command headquarters as a cryptograph operator. So whatever happened there, I don't know and never did know, but I did some artistic work for the division and that type of thing, drawing. I had quite a bit of training in that prior to the time I went in, and before I went into, actually before I went into law school, I'd taken quite a bit of training along that line, but nothing of any great scholastic position or anything else of that nature. But I presume it was somewhat uneventful as far as we were concerned. I don't remember anything that sticks out to be a sore thumb in that area. But then we went there, and then we went overseas. Of course, we landed there, and all sorts of stories came out when we landed at Le Havre, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, first we went to England. I don't remember whether we went to Portland or someplace of that nature. And we went then to Tidworth Barracks, which was actually an old Indian barracks. I don't know whether you ever got into that with any of your people that you've talked to. But I think that the Indians left in about 1880, 1890, and left it, and we were cleaning up everything that they left back then. Because it was somewhat unkempt, dirty. So we landed there, and it was actually not a bad area, because it was near Salisbury's, England. And if I remember correctly, we have that's the field over there with the stones of Stonehenge, and which was quite interesting. As you drove to Salisbury, you could see them off in the distance. I don't think we ever went out there, but it was a very interesting area. I presume you've known of that in your studies. It has a lot of so-called religious significance, perhaps, of 2000 BC or something of that nature.
Tidworth was pretty close to that.
Yes, very close to it. And we used to go into Salisbury. And then at one point, I think, I went to London for a couple of days. I remember Whitehall. I think I celebrated my 21st birthday in London. And then, of course, came back to camp. And it wasn't that bad, though. Really, it cleaned it up, and I had halfway decent quarters. And the Combat Command B did have a legitimate area. And even if you were enlisted or officer, whatever you were, you had quite good quarters. I think at that time I was connected with the cooks. A little bit of everything.
Well, who were your buddies up to this point?
Oh, it's hard to remember because it changed so darn much. But we had Compula, and Sergeant Fisher was, I think, our first sergeant. I think he was back then as well. And just think of a lot of them. I can't even think of their names anymore. But Burr was at he was in there. He was a truck driver. He didn't show up this time, but he's been at many of the meetings of the 12th Armored. As to other people in the barracks, it's hard to actually remember. I think Captain Whitlow was our captain at that point too, but he was also in the 12th Armored over there in Europe, so it sort of merges, because you remember people back there, you remember people in Europe, and try to separate them, you'd almost have to have a book to try to run down the names.
Well, now, how did you get over? Did you come in at Le Havre with everyone else?
Yes, as I said, we came through England. One interesting area there that maybe you never got into for a long period of time, or at least long period, a week, couple of weeks sometimes back then. That was a long time. We were in a camp with English paratroopers, and it was rather interesting because they had their tea time. Of course, their tea time was with our regular metal cups that we had, but it was interesting meeting these people over there. They had their own stories to tell, and it was somewhat different. Then finally we moved out. We went to Le Havre, and there was a story, whether good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know. There was a lot of stories going around then that sometimes were fictional, sometimes were legitimate. That the ship we came over may have sunk with an oyster mine or something going out of the harbor, but I never was able to nail that down either way. So we landed there, and after a short period of time, I think we went down to a place called Offay. And basically, I traveled with Message Center. Sometimes there's interesting little side glances on that, because remember one time it may not have been quite legitimate, but everybody was doing things that may and may not be legitimate. Is we were stationed, at least the headquarters was stationed in what was a police barracks, and it was a little lax. And two of us decided we were going to go to a party the Frenchmen were having down there. So we went. And I always liked the story, it's sort of cute. And it was some way away from the barracks. So this was in France, it may have been beyond Offay sometime. So we went there, and so we were driving back, black as pitch. All you could see was big trees, like a gray sky. We get back, and we came back to this barracks back there, and headquarters had moved out already. So they said, what do we do now? I said, well, they went that way. So off we took, like a big bird, down the road. And finally we got into a small town there. We're still looking for our headquarters. And dark. Here comes an old German across the way. I suppose this was down somewhere by the time we got down to Alsace. Time-wise, I don't remember. And so my German wasn't that good, but it passable. So I asked the old man there, I said, wo ist die amerikanische Hauptquartier? He says, nein, amerikanisch, da ist der deutsche Hauptquartier. So I turned around and I said, you know, we're ahead of the front lines, let's get back. So we turned around, scooted back. We finally found our headquarters. But the American lines hadn't got that far forward yet. So, I mean, they're interesting little escapades that you can get into. But beyond that, I don't know what, there's all sorts of little things that are weird. Of course, in Luneville, of course, you always had these fights, etc., and you were always landing on your nose somewhere in the ground, little shells going over your head. And Luneville, I think, was French. French had some very interesting, what you call them, inventions, not like ours. One place, to digress again, is they had stalls there for the men and women, and they had deals about that high, about a foot, maybe less, where you stand, do whatever you need to do, and automatically these flush. And if you hear it grumbling, you jump, because that'll come right over your shoes. That was their system. But I don't know, there's a lot of other types of things I don't know. Again, you may have to lead me a little bit as to what you might wonder, what I can even remember.
Well, this is exactly what we want. We kind of know the chronology, so we just kind of want you.
But you get in there and you come down from, as I said, from France through Alsace, a lot of that. And that, I think our unit probably went through more of that than any place else, because I think you'll find out that our history runs us through that area.
What kind of things were you doing during the war?
Well, during the war, as I said, most of it was Message Center. I did more or less different odd jobs. I don't even remember exactly what they were till about, I would say about the time in May when the Germans surrendered. At that point, I think I came out of the closet perhaps a little more than anything else, because at that point the information education program suddenly became the important thing for the U.S. Army. In other words, keep them out of mischief. Of course, I had gone to Paris and mostly that on the R&R we all had that, but I don't know of anything exciting that may have happened in Paris. We came back to the unit, of course. There was a lot of things that, of course, the cities we're in, you probably know, or you can take a look at a map until I can tell you. They can tell you a lot more than I can tell you. A lot of weird things, of course, happens during the war. You're in a building, the windows all come in on you, and some of the sights are not the best. Of course, you drive along, you'll see a German tank, perhaps, or even an American tank with somebody half burnt to a crisp hanging out of the tank, which isn't the prettiest area. Remember in Colmar, we ended up in a place, a park in the middle of it. Again, digress back from the end of the war. Remember stepping out of the half track and almost stepping on a dead German laying there, and we propped him up against a tree and left him there till we moved out of there. And the engineers had cleaned the streets out because there was quite a bit of fighting there, and there was quite a bit of bodies laying all over the place. The time we got there, most of it had been removed. Because, again, we had the units were ahead of us. Of course, they all laugh sometimes, and maybe it's not laughing, maybe it is cute in its own, that the Combat Command Headquarters is what they call a dead zone many times. When they're aiming for the front troops and they miss, they'll land on the troops behind there, which is the Combat Command. And sometimes they're aiming at the Combat Command because they want to knock out the headquarters. So you've got two areas where you might have some shelling coming specifically at you, or not specifically, but ending at you. So even though perhaps the headquarters isn't out in the front line, they did follow right on the heels of the battalions. Excuse me. May I? Glass of water here for a minute.
To tell you something I'm curious about, since you said that, during some kind of conflict, like you were saying, two different ways you guys might encounter shelling. What kind of setup, strategically, what did your outfit look like then, headquarters? What would you guys do to prevent, besides just pitching a tent?
Well, it isn't pitching tents, of course. It didn't pitch tents much. What you did is you tried to get into a house, or you slept on the half track, or in the half track, or anything like that. I suppose, to the best of my memory, we did not pitch many shelters. It was mostly getting into a house, sleeping in the track, sleeping in the tank, wherever you were. In fact, I remember curling around a radio antenna on a Jeep and fell asleep one time. Smaller, probably a little bit more elastic than I am now. But there wasn't that much of that type of thing, not in the headquarters. Sometimes you get aggravated. I remember one time in one of the cities we were put out in the middle of a field, and this was next to a town, and the officers didn't feel that was nice for us to rout the Germans out of there. They went to sleep, and we were supposed to sleep out in the field. Suffice to say, in the morning, the Germans were sleeping out in the field, and we were in the houses. That's an order that wasn't quite followed, because there was some shelling going on. We said that apparently we felt that the Germans started it, let them receive their own presents. But you slept where you could in any way you were. Because one time, and that isn't sleeping, but it's at night, it gives you an idea what went on at the middle of the night. I don't remember the exact area. Sometimes, again, all that merges unless you're writing it down. I was in Message Center, and one of my jobs was to run messages to the half-tracks. The half-tracks usually were out in the field somewhere where they could get some area, because you have your antennas and everything. And they work a lot better if they're out in the field. And a fellow named Erwin Walters. And they all had a little Coleman stoves, a cup of coffee, keep them awake. And this was at night, pitch black. Normally you wouldn't think they'd be shelling, but sometimes they did. And I went out there with some kind of message, and Erwin was a good friend of mine. He was a nice guy. And he said, come on, have a cup of coffee. And I said, well, I better get back because either I was the only one there or there were some messages coming in. Some reason I said, no. Once in a while, if it was real dull, we would stop for a very short time. I mean, you couldn't spend half an hour out there. You might stay 2 or 3 minutes out there. And so I said, next time I'll stop if everything calms down. I didn't get from here to about where you're sitting, which I presume is how far? Maybe 10 feet. And shell hit the half track and blew it all to hell, and everyone was killed. So if I stopped for coffee, I wouldn't be there this morning. But I mean, those were that type of things. Bishwiller had a very interesting one, and of course, Bishwiller is something that they talk about out there. And we were at a big hospital there. I think CCA and CCB both were there, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't know CCA was there, but they told me they were on one end and we were on the other end. Presumably. And sometimes the stories we got were right, and sometimes, again, they were wrong. The 9th Armored had been overrun by the Germans. And they had got a lot of their equipment. They had got their uniforms. Apparently, the Germans had a number of people that were educated in the United States and Britain, etc. And they were quite fluent in speaking. So they said that this group of Germans knew the American password, and they spoke quite good English. So we were put out there, and with this type of warning, it wasn't a very comfortable situation. So I ended up in one of the doorways, and this was I don't know what time, but it was just about before dawn started breaking. So I presume maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And we were heard boom, boom, 2 dull sounds in front of me, who's there. Because basically everybody was afraid somebody would ask them some kind of football game. If you weren't very good at sports, you might get shot because you didn't answer it right. So everybody was very, very nervous. And I didn't know whether those footsteps or what they were. All you could hear is pop, pop. So a challenge, black, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And nobody answered. So you stood there like this watching to see what the hell's going on. And finally the dawn broke, and there was 2 shells, I'd say again, very close. And neither one had gone off. I'd say again, those shells probably weren't as far away as your baggage there, 5 feet away. Either one probably would have blown me and the doorway apart to smithereens. I think it's quite unusual. Probably 2 of them didn't go off, but they didn't. So the morning broke, and Brendan Phibbs, he's written a book on the 12th. I don't know the name of it offhand. He should be one of your people to talk to if he ever ends up at one of these conventions. And he came along with a Jeep, and I had been familiar with these people. It wasn't that I had any great position, but at least I had what amounted to a college education by that time. I was in the 3rd or 4th year of college. And I made a lot of friends as the officers in the headquarters, and Brendan Phibbs was one. The Major Avery was another. Colonel Bromley was another. Cooper was another. And he says, Jerry, he says, what are you doing here? He said, I'm on guard, sir. What am I supposed to be doing for all purposes? He says, everybody's pulling out of here. You're all supposed to have been relieved. Well, somebody didn't relieve any of us. So he said, you know what posts are? So I said, yeah. So I got into his Jeep, and we went around relieving people, and you could see out in the field as far as you can see there, but dawn was starting to break. There was a whole line of, I believe, king tigers waiting for dawn to break so they could come in there and see what they were doing. They were lobbing a few in, but not a lot. So it was an interesting side glance at thing. I think everybody was moving out of there, and somebody probably forgot to get rid of the guards. So we were guarding part of a building that probably was half empty. Maybe it was partially empty, I don't know. I don't think Phibbs gave me any information of what was going on. I think at that time he was a major, but he was a combat command doctor or surgeon. So he wasn't in charge of guards or anything. He was part of the headquarters. Very, very nice guy.
What was your rank when the war started?
My rank started, I was as low as you could get. And it was very peculiar in that thing, and it's got an interesting history too. Apparently, for a large part of the end of the war, unless for you had, I suppose you were in the infantry or something, a lot of the headquarters, all the ranks were frozen. Don't ask me why or how, but nobody was getting promoted, period. It did create a lot of problems toward the end, but that's in itself. But maybe I'll digress from a little bit from the war at this point. At the tail end of the war, going back to something I had started earlier, that information education program was sort of interesting, something which I may have been involved in more than some of the other activities. The Army started a school at Oberammergau, which is maybe you've heard of that. It's where the Passion Play is, and all the buildings are very well painted with biblical scenes, etc. Very interesting setting. But up above it was an old Messerschmitt factory, and that's where they had the school. Somehow, out of Combat Command B, everybody was trying to send somebody up there to say, hey, what's going on? What do you want us to do? How do you want us to do it? So there's a Captain Gaucher, and I haven't heard of him for years, was alive or not alive, I don't know. And I were sent from the Combat Command. So we had some training. I must have done all right, because I do have a clipping from a rail splitter newspaper saying that they had a big banquet for the outstanding students, and apparently I must have been the one, because I had number one and some other sergeant. The two of us had a dinner. Anyway, we were sent back. So we got back at the Combat Command B, and it wasn't, God, I don't know how long, but very, very, very short time. Gaucher had enough points to get back, because at that time you're on a point system. And Gaucher left. So at that time, I have a feeling that Colonel Gordon may have been in command of our Combat Command B. Colonel Bromley may have left. And I went in there and I saw him. And he said, well, talk to me. Okay, fine. I was going to argue with the full colonel. So he said, you know, we've got a problem. He says, I've been told by Corps that information education program must be considered as the primary program for the division. He says, this is all over. And he says, you're the only one in this whole command that knows what the devil they want. He says, I'll give you a desk in the headquarters. Major William Cooper, who died here a few years ago, he'll sign whatever papers you have to sign. And do what you can for him. He says, you'll serve no other duty. You'll just have a desk in our headquarters, which I did get. And so at that point, we're in the city of Heidenheim, which is another city you may hear from people, because it ended up there. And to the best of my knowledge, we took over a school, fairly large school in Heidenheim. And somewhat under my weird direction, we went through a bunch of the background files of the officers and enlisted men that we had available. And anybody that had some type of instructor ability or training that would show up in the report, because they may have had it not been there, we made instructors. And we started some courses in the school to keep, and we had them brought in on trucks, and they went to school. And to back that up, I started a circulating library of small paperbacks. They're about that big. What would I say, 5 inches on each side and perhaps 8 or 9 inches on the top. And you may have seen them or you may not have seen them, but they were very, very common during World War II. Now they're collector's items because they aren't around it much anymore. They must have had thousands of them then, though. And we had a card index. It was sort of nice. In fact, Gordon was quite happy with it because the Corps commended him. He said that was one of the finest things that anybody could figure out in the Corps. But we had a truck going around with cards. It was a card index. Whether they ever got them back is a good question. I don't think anybody really cared. But
well, you said you brought them into the school, the GIs? Is it?
They were all, yes. There was no German instructors. These were all, we worked within our own unit. In other
Right,
words,
but I mean,
within the combat command.
The instructors were instructing.
Students. In other words, anybody that would like to sign up for the classes, or we hope they would, we brought into school. No, not Germans. JIs. The basic thing in all of these things was to keep them out of mischief. That was what the information education program was. And as I said, I was supposedly the only one that knew anything about it because Gaucher and I had gone to school for it for about I don't know, 2 weeks, I suppose something like that. So I ended up being the only one being it, so I ended up with a job of trying to do anything on it. And it was a very unusual situation, I agree, because I remember distinctly that one time I called up, for some reason the truck didn't come in, I don't even know why, I can't even tell. But there was a Lieutenant Colonel Clow, was he alive or dead? I would presume now he's gone, because I think that he was quite a bit older than some of us. And he was mad because apparently I had called his headquarters or sent a note to his headquarters saying that the men should attend the school. And they weren't attending. I don't even remember what Colonel Clow was the head of anymore. And he was madder than hell at me that I'll have no goddamn private. We're all telling my unit what to do. I said, sure. I said, I'm not doing anything that I'm not supposed to be doing. But he was raving and quite mad at me, I suppose, in the headquarters. And I think it was Colonel Gordon. As I said, I keep thinking that was him. Walked over and he said, what's going on? I handed him the field telephone, because we had a field telephone with us. And he listens, ranting and raving. So he said, you know who you were talking to? Okay, bang, this is Colonel Gordon. He then proceeded to tell him that if he couldn't do what the headquarters wanted him to do, that he would have another commanding officer down there. And I think I had to call his headquarters again later that day, and I ended up with, yes, sir. I'll never forget that. But it was a very peculiar thing. Then finally, the division started breaking up. I presume this was, I keep thinking, August or September. A lot of this was compressed into a short period of time. Because you remember, the war was over in about May, early part of May. And the division supposedly was deactivated in December. So a lot of people were leaving because of the high points. And I took a group from the 12th. In fact, one of them is, I don't know if you're having him talk or not. I went out to supper with him last night, Lloyd DeLuca. He was from CCA, but we didn't limit it to CCA. Anybody that would like to go to, I keep thinking Shoreham was a school, and Biarritz was the other one. There was two of them that were American universities. And I think when we checked, Biarritz was open, Shoreham wasn't. So again, I don't know the exact number, but I have a feeling it was about 20-some men from the division who were left. And probably most of us had fairly low points, at least not for immediate return. Because the points, I think, extended back as long as you were in the service. So I suppose the people who were in the service for a long time had more points. Because we just came in at the tail end when when we were all when the unit was leaving. So Colonel had no objection, of course, as I said, and we all went to Biarritz, which was a very, very nice place. If you remember, this was considered the resort of kings, and it was on the beach in the Mediterranean. It was a very nice place to be at. A hell of a lot better than Germany, I assure you. So at school I was taking a Bachelor of Science in Commerce course, and they had some very good instructors there, very good instructors. I can give you a tail end of that for one time. And I took some commerce courses, and I took a couple arts courses. Fine arts, painting, drawing, models, this type of thing. That wasn't my major at school, though, but it was something of which I had some training and was interested in. So when the semester was over, the majority, of course, was returned to their units. It was only supposed to be a one-semester deal. In other words, it's almost like a combination vacation course. Later it turned out that it was far more than a vacation. But somehow I got retained by the fine arts section to be assistant professor, honor student type of thing. And I got held over for another 6 months or close to it at Biarritz. So when I went back, the division had already been disbanded. And I understand some were sent to CCA, some were sent elsewhere that were going home. And the remainder, at least the group I was in, because I don't know what happened to the rest of them, was outside of Stuttgart in Schwäbisch Hall. We had the 771st Tank. I think that's basically where the men came from, but they also CCB people were in there. And it finally turned into the 71st Constabulary Squadron, but that was tail enders almost all of the 12th. And then they started coming in from the States to take over some of those jobs, and we were sent home. But that's sort of a history of the end of the 12th at that point. So, ask me questions, I'll try to answer them.
What was your experience in Earlisheim?
Again, we were, I don't remember any distinct things except to the fact that the headquarters was there, and there, of course it was common that you would be in headquarters and you would land in there and you wouldn't be out there really on the firing line anywhere, because you were in the message said you were in a building somewhere, because this was a command headquarters, and your officers there, of course, you were far above a normal battalion or anything like that, because you had a full colonel commanding, you had a staff of probably 2 or 3 majors, you had captains in there running around. You had it was a fairly high-ranking area, of course, because remember, there was only 3 of these in a division. You had your combat command A, B, and R, which I presume was reserve. I think General Ennis commanded the reserve. I don't remember who commanded CCA because I never was in it. I think I've seen it out there, but I didn't know them. But I knew everybody in Combat Command B, because somehow with your being in the, where you have the messages, etc., you're constantly going in and out of the Combat Command as well, headquarters. So we weren't in the front line as much as you would think otherwise, like your battalions would be. And this is true almost throughout the war, because most of your battalions, of course, are protecting in some way or other your combat command, because your basic orders come out of division combat command, and the combat command is really your control center. Because the division, you're too far extended. You're into everything. Where combat command has its troops under it, the closer you get down to the battalions, the more you're in command of you're in direct command of these units. And they're going to try to protect you, because they below that combat command, they've made a hell of a big deal for the Germans. And as I said, we were in tanks, medium, or most of the time, I think we had 37 millimeters, the small ones, most of the ones I was in. And I had every job imaginable. I don't think I was a driver very much, but I was a gunner where the turret was and about everything else around there. And then a half track, we moved as in the signal portion, were probably more than anything we moved on half tracks, because a half track is where you carried your signal equipment. I presume you know what they are. You've seen pictures of them. They're sort of a truck in the beginning and a tracks in the end. But when you're in the message center, in the signal area, you're going to end up going with the signal vehicles. I remember around Dillingen, was it, with the Danube business there. I know that the half tracks also, most of them had a 50 caliber. It's a large circle that this thing circles on. It's a track. And the shooting at the planes, I mean, this was not uncommon either, because you know, when that Danube crossing, the time they saved the bridge, I'm sure you'll heard of that. That was a big deal. They were around there like bees, and all you did was shoot these damn things up in the air and try to keep them away from the bridge and away from your unit. And these planes were fast, but I don't think they were too maneuverable. Too fast. They weren't completely perfected. And you could put up a line of fire, and they'd run into them, and they'd explode. So what you did is you just try to make up a line of fire and try to have them run into it. So you had these 50 caliber machine guns going pretty regular, and they were flying fairly low. They was trying to stop people from using that bridge or keeping it. So we had that there. I mean, there's a lot of little things that I just can't remember, and I suppose unless you point at them and say, did this happen? At Rohrbach was another place. They shelled the building, and when they start shelling, you go wherever you can go to get cover, whether it's under a tree trunk laying there or whether it's whatever it was. I remember one fellow, and I don't know why they should even say his name. I haven't heard him for years. He was out there on a slit trench, and I presume you know what those were. They were, shall we call them, an outdoor toilet, and the shelling came in on them. Well, let's suffice it to say that most of the unit didn't talk to him for about a week after he got through. That was the closest trench he could find. But there's humorous sides to it, too. That was at Rohrbach. At Rohrbach, I don't know. I think I injured my hand, but somehow or other that went away. I know I went through a long period of time there with the damn gloves cut out, one glove with the fingers cut out of the glove. Colder than hell. But some fingers are bandaged up. But I never applied for a Purple Heart, never got one. I figured too many other people deserved a lot more than I did. Didn't lose any fingers, but it was cold as the devil. But you had windows blowing in on you, and you had these other things. We were more, I would say, in the headquarters, you had more of shelling than you did any immediate rifle fire. And I never got back that far.
Well, is there
Shoot.
anything else you want to, if there was something you could say to, say, later generations that, from your experience in the war, what would it be?
Well, one thing was sort of interesting. Maybe it's interesting from that purpose. When I got out, I think it was at Shanks, and I don't remember whether the questions and answers were at where we landed. I think we landed at Kilmer, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember if we left at Kilmer. I think it was Kilmer we came back at. And then our area went down to Fort Leavenworth to get out. And they asked us, do we want to stay in the reserves or stay in the Army? My reaction was no, because of course I was actually in the middle of my college career when I got jerked out and put in there. And so when I went back, this digresses a little bit, but yet I think it might be interesting. When I went back there, I was sort of in between. I had had some law courses, and I hadn't quite finished my commerce course And I had started my law school. At those times, you could take a little bit of each. It was what they call an accelerated program. I don't know if you have anything like that now. But I had taken about a year of law, and I was maybe a year, maybe less than a year for my commerce degree. So I wanted to get back as quick as I could and get back into that, which I did. And when I went back to Creighton, of course, you go in, you see the dean, you're back again, etc. And I tried to get some credit because I had these certificates from Biarritz. And he started looking through them, and he said, well, he didn't, before he started looking, he said, I don't think we can give you any credit for this because we don't know the instructors, we don't know what the quality of the instructors are, and also these courses don't have the same credit hours. They might have 8 credit hours and they give you 6 or 5 or even reverse could happen, but mostly the other way. Because this was an accelerated program in Biarritz. But so he said, so his name was Floyd Wallace, and he said, wait a minute. So he picked up something on corporation finance. I don't know if you have that course here in your college or not, but in a business college, this is still a very rough course. And he goes over to his book cabinet, pulls out the text being used by Creighton University for corporate finance. My instructor in Biarritz wrote the text that Creighton was using. So he said, I can't believe they have this type of professors there. So he said, let me talk to the dean about this thing, not the dean of the college, but the school. This was above him, maybe president, wherever he was going. He said, I've got to talk to some people about this thing. And I ended up getting credit for every course I took at Biarritz. The instructors were, one was a law professor, I think, from one of the colleges. And everybody there had probably better backgrounds than Creighton had. So that turned out to be a bonanza as far as the credit hours were concerned. So anyway, I got out of there, and a couple of times I was in college. For some reason, I don't know if my records followed me or whatever happened to them, but before I got out of law school, I got offered twice, one direct commission in the infantry and the other direct commission in military intelligence. But neither one was quite what I wanted. Finally, I got out and started practicing. I don't think I was out 6 months. I got another call. They said, we have an opening for a first lieutenant in the Judge Advocate Corps. That was more in my, I was an attorney. It might be interesting. So I accepted that one. And actually, I didn't accept it. There was 2 positions. There was one position open for Nebraska. 2 was applied. I think Panabianco. I don't remember the name of the fellow that applied, but he was, I think, from the Internal Revenue Service. And they didn't take him. They took me. So I became the first one after the war out of Nebraska with a direct commission. And then one of the first jobs I got, that was in 1949, was to critique the 1949 Uniform Code of Military Justice. In 1951, a new edition was put up, basically showing some of our objections. Not mine particularly, but mine plus a lot of other people. And then I stayed in various, I commanded all the JAG units in Nebraska for a while. I was counterpart of the Staff Judge Advocate of 5th Army for a while in San Antonio. I had that for about 4 years. He'd go on vacation, I'd take over the JAG office down there. But then in 1980, I retired, mainly reservist, as a full colonel, which was a lot of difference in the PFC when I was back there. Anyway, if there's anything further that I can give you, go ahead.
Man, I can't think of anything. Is there anything else you can think of?
I don't.
What was your, when you came back, did you ever get married? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got married probably in 1954.
Do you have any kids?
Yeah, one of them's with me. You might have seen him down here. Michael, he's somewhat heavy-set and little beard.
Okay.
And then I have another son that's with me in the law office, Barry Grossman. He's an attorney. Michael, I don't know, I think he likes to buy and sell antiques more than anything else. He stays at home, though. He is not married. Barry is and has two very fine little boy and little girl. Beyond that, of course, my dad was in the Navy in World War I, but I don't think that means too much. But maybe it does. But beyond that, I don't know what I can. I don't think they're too much interested in my legal career in the Army. That has nothing to do with the 12th, but it was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Have you been coming to the division reunions throughout the years?
Well, I can't say I haven't. I can't say I have. I have gone to some of them, but I've been active in so many other units. I've been president of the Retired Officers Association of Offutt. They're still the second vice president in charge of their programs. I was the commander of 2 states and one other veterans organization, reserve officers. I was president of Nebraska and judge advocate. I'm still the judge advocate for the Department of Nebraska Reserve Officers Association. So I still have so many different activities that I sort of have to place wherever I want to go. I don't know whether I particularly like this vacation though. We can't get anywhere. My wife is a little objectionable. She wants to go to the Galleria Mall every morning. I hear that, and every time I ask, they say that's a big puddle around there. So this, I doubt, is too much for your group there.
That's great.
I hope I've given you some information.